Well, hello and welcome everyone to the next installment of Smart Inclusion and today's conversation, which will be about modeling a culture of inclusion in recruiting. As SmartSearch has been developing our HR technology platform to support diversity outreach and recruiting and hiring, we're talking to our clients, vendor partners, industry advocates, and thought leaders about trends, challenges, and solutions for employers on how to create a more diverse and inclusive workplace. And today I am extremely excited to have Omari Jahi Aarons with us. He is the founder and managing partner of Aarons Group, which is a workplace diversity and inclusion consulting firm. Omari is a proud alum of Apple, Macy's, and Liberty Mutual, where you only pay for what you need. And Omari frequently integrates perspectives from his corporate and community experiences with his work. Omari was also recognized as a 2021 40 LGBTQ leader under 40 for America, for North America, right, by Business Equity magazine. And Omari is also a Howard Thurman Fellow at Boston University School of Theology, where he's pursuing a master's in divinity. So I'm very excited to see what you have to say about inclusive recruiting and modeling a culture of inclusive recruiting. So what exactly does that mean? Like what does it mean to model a culture of inclusion in the recruiting process?
Absolutely, and Sylvia, it's great to be with you today as well. I'm very excited for our conversation. You know, I like to think of it like when you first meet someone and you really are putting your best foot forward about who you are, right? It's a way of kind of courting a person, and that really is what the recruiting process is about. You're showing the best parts of your culture. You're showing the best ways to be engaged, the ways that people have fun inside of the workplace, the ways that people connect to each other. In the recruiting process, we don't normally show places where people feel excluded inside of our workplace, right? And so really, you know, when we think about modeling a culture of inclusion in the recruiting process, it's thinking about what's true across the organization in ways that the organization helps to bring people together, to help them feel included, to embrace their whole selves and all the dimensions of diversity that they bring to the table. And how do you show that truth in the recruiting process for people as they come on board?
Interesting. So with regards to the recruiting process, what does that process indicate for candidates about the environment where they'll be working?
Yeah, you know, what's been really interesting in particular around the conversations that we've been having now out loud and more frequently about inclusion is that we're calling more attention to representation or the lack of representation that's in the workspace. And so candidates, regardless of what dimensions of diversity they carry, which I always find is interesting, they're looking around in the workplace and they're noticing the number of women that are in leadership roles. They're noticing the number of people of color in leadership roles. They're looking at generational diversity that exists in the workplace. They're looking at really everything. They're looking to see, is this a workplace that celebrates Pride Month, that celebrates Women's History Month, that celebrates Hispanic Heritage Month, right? And so all of those are indicators, all of those types of celebrations, all of the representation that's visible for people, all of that is indicators of the type of culture that a person would be joining that's visible for them in the recruiting process. And so whether a candidate will actually ask that out loud and will ask, like, what are the percentages of people of color in the workplace? What is the men, women, gender diversity, non-binary percentages in the workplace? How do you embrace the LGBTQ in each of those letters, which represents its own unique community with its own strengths and with its own challenges? You know, candidates are noticing what the workplace has to offer for all of the communities, all the different dimensions of diversity. And so that really is what we're trying to model in the opportunity to model in the recruiting process, is to make sure that you're bringing forth employees of color, that you're bringing forth women, that you are showcasing things that your culture, your work environment actually embrace.
Great. You know, you mentioned it has to be real and true, right? So what are some specific ways that recruiters can demonstrate that without it coming across as like false, right? Like, because you know how you want to put your best foot forward, right? But you don't want the, you know, if you have the beta version, you want to make sure it really works, right? Because you can't fool them for long, right? So how do you keep it real, and what are some specific ways that recruiters can demonstrate that inclusion without being over the top?
Yeah. So this is what gets really interesting about the recruiter role, and I think ways in which recruiters can help push the boundaries in their organization to say, hey, you know, this is a critical issue for people that we are trying to recruit. We are potentially losing out, or actually losing out, on candidates who don't want to come work here or don't think that this would be a safe environment because of what we're able to show in the recruiting process. And so I say to organizations that have employee resource groups, having members and leaders of the employee resource groups present in the recruiting process, serving as ambassadors, talking openly about their experience, not just the great things, but also the moments where they've experienced perhaps some painful or difficult moments, how the company has responded, how they're seeing the trajectory of those things getting better as the company has been implementing its own DEI strategic plan and rolling out additional initiatives. That authenticity in the story is so critically important. The example, I was interviewing with a company, and I had been very actively involved in employee resource groups at one of my previous companies. This is when I was at Macy's. And the recruiter noticed on my resume that I had these leadership roles in the different employee resource groups. And she just asked me, you know, when you're coming, you know, to visit our campus, would it be helpful to have some members of the employee resource groups come and meet with you? And I said, absolutely, I'd love to do that. Just get a sense, you know, if I came here and worked at this company, it's something I would absolutely be involved in. And hearing their perspectives was wonderful. And I talk about that company, that experience I had recruiting, so much so that two of my friends now work at that company, right?
Funny how that works out. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've, in some ways, without ever becoming an employee of this company, right, I've become an ambassador for them because my recruiting process was so good. And I think that is really one of the strengths of an inclusive recruiting process, is that you're creating ambassadors out of people, whether they get the job offer or not, whether they accept the job offer or not, that they still have a great view of your workplace.
Right, and letting that authenticity shine through, right? Because you got to be a believer to be an ambassador, right? So if you let that shine through, I think a good point is that how candidates are experiencing the recruiting process. How can we make that continue through their actual employment, and how can recruiters help push those changes forward to advance the needle and creating that workplace culture of inclusion? And what was the new word I learned last week? It was belonging, right? Like
Yes.
we want to feel like we belong, right?
Yes.
So how do we get there?
Well, you know, I think this is one of the places where recruiters can push, right? And so it's as they connect with their colleagues at different events that they're at, if they're all at a job fair, right? When we're able to do those things in person again, right? You know, recruiters have kind of their own network of talking to people and seeing other best practices that other companies are implementing and taking some of that in. And so, you know, if you don't have employee resource groups, then that example that we just talked about might not necessarily be something that you can do in your organization. But does that become a point then that a recruiter can say back to the head of HR, to some of the business heads, hey, every other company that's in our space has employee resource groups, and their members have been wonderful, showing up and being great ambassadors, joining in the recruiting process is something that we should implement here. And so, you know, there's a great opportunity always to involve employees at every level to come and talk to candidates about their experience. I know as a candidate myself, and as someone who's been in that ambassador seat, it feels great to have a somewhat unfiltered conversation with someone about the culture. That's not just the 3 points that are on the company website or the
Right.
recruit brochure.
Right. For candidates, I would actually give that piece of advice would be to seek, like, let's say they don't have an employee resource group per se. I would say go look for other people that work at that company and talk to them and get the real deal, right?
Yeah.
Because there'll be warts and all, like that unfiltered conversation. Wow. Well, thank you, Omari. This has been very fun and enlightening and given me quite a bit to think about. And I really do appreciate you sharing your insights and perspective and certainly experience on smart inclusion and how we can move that needle forward in bringing more equity to the workplace and sharing this with the recruiting community.
Well, thank you so much for having me.